Here we are. We are live from with the Q crew.
Crew.
From the northeast quadrant of the quarantine zone. I am Sparks, the resident Maoist slash kangaroo enthusiast.
I am Maddie, and I'm feeling pretty salty tonight.
And I'm Peter Nichols Eater. Don't ask me how I got that name. It's a dark tale.
And together we are Voltron. Together we are the Culture, Language, Art, and Worker of the Worker podcast. The goal of this, I don't think we've talked about this on the live stream before, but our goal is to dismantle the kind of soft power that exists within what's called hegemonic culture or cultural hegemony, which is how a ruling class controls the lower class or lower classes through propagating ruling class values as universal ones. And as we begin to internalize these values as like common sense values of all, what happens is we internalize their culture and their cultural values, and it's very easy to manipulate people. It's the whole. It's the final part of the analysis as to why people support billionaires and tax policy that is only preferable to, say, billionaires or the very wealthy.
Yeah.
And people go, well, there's. Go ahead.
Yeah, they don't even they're not helping themselves out whatsoever. They just got one track.
Right. Well, there's usually this like that's just a weird quirk about the American people because they think they'll be wealthy
Yeah, well,
someday.
they've been made to believe that there's such thing as a trickle-down effect or something. That's not the way it works.
Well, right. But what's the architecture of that? Okay, and that's what we're talking about. The architecture of that is this cultural hegemony, this idea that their values, that their culture is the predominant one, is the correct one, is the universal culture. And we lose our own principles, our own values, our own preferred policy sets, all these sorts of things in that mess. But tonight, we're going to be talking a little more about. Yesterday, we talked with a buddy of ours who's in the trades. He's a big old construction guy, like myself, except he actually like makes decisions. I just build things. About kind of what's going on in that sector, especially in this crisis. And I tried to, at the end, kind of rush through the more far-reaching economic impact of this, but also like this is a crisis that has been looming since at least 2008, if not since right after the Iraq War. Certainly as it began, if not, I mean, in the 80s or from the advent of capitalism. We can argue over the timeline, but the simple fact is, this isn't some external shock to an otherwise functioning system. If it was, like, these things happen every few years, so like even on its face that's a false narrative. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is more broadly what working class people can do to get through this crisis, what that looks like, why this narrative around returning to normal isn't productive, but also kind of harmful in some ways. And some other stuff. But I know, Maddie, you wanted to start with something in particular. So, go ahead.
Well, Bernie dropped out today, and I don't know, maybe I should have seen it coming, but I honestly haven't been paying attention to any of that stuff since all of this has happened. But I just feel like even though it was bleak, there was a chance, and now it's like it sealed the deal. We have 4 more years of Trump.
Well,
Like any hope of any kind of socialist policies are just gone.
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. I'm pissed off. I'm pissed at Bernie for dropping out.
Well, I mean, look at it this way: we're going to be president now.
And I'm
He can't run. He's not going to run in 4 years.
yeah, no. And but more than that, I'm pissed at every fucking liberal out there who's screaming that we all need to just like pinch our noses and vote for the blue rapist instead of the red rapist. Like, forgetting the fact that this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. They're just like, vote for this rapist.
Well, also, like, I mean, that. Additionally, he is a war criminal.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is a war criminal. I mean, we can argue about like his role in the Iraq War. Certainly, as one of the Democratic architects and propagators of it. And he doesn't regret that at all.
Yeah.
He would do it again. He still wants to have the same. He still has a relatively similar Trumpian foreign policy. Not even Trumpian. Like all this infrastructure exists before. The drone wars accelerated under Trump, but what administration kind of? I mean, the Bush administration kind of built that,
And
then the Obama administration accelerated it, and then the Trump administration accelerated even further and stopped releasing or stopped counting even civilian casualties. So, there should be no questions about his record. Like, he should have already been brought to The Hague.
Yeah.
A long line of American leadership should be tried for war crimes under the Nuremberg principle. I mean, every single American president, certainly since Roosevelt, and you can make an argument for the evils of the Roosevelt administration as well, as to. They all are international criminals. That is a criminal syndicate that's been going on for 100 years. And so, like, all of that aside, and definitely, like, there's no question, like, he's a sexual predator. He's inappropriate as
the
hell.
evidence is fucking everywhere.
And like, we're not even having that discussion. That discussion is out of it. The discussion isn't like, well, okay, well, that's disqualifying. The discussion is we just have to do this because, like, otherwise it's Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a flawed argument for many reasons. But this is the flaw in bourgeois politics. This is the flaw in funneling, social growth or everything through electoral politics. Is you're essentially saying, like, we just have to get the right guy. I mean, Pete Buttigieg was saying some of these exact things openly. He was saying, like, having the right people on the levers of power, like that is that's liberalism right there. That is saying, like, we just need our guy in control, and it'll be fine. And beyond the fact that that's a huge statement of privilege, it also misses an understanding of what happened during the Obama administration and how that led to Trump. So even if Joe Biden does win, right, like, his administration will be one of austerity and horrible, oppressive foreign policy, as with, like, any Democrat would be. Elizabeth Warren would have been terrible on foreign policy.
Fuck Elizabeth Warren.
But you know, this is the point here, that we can't just have these. It's presented as an either or statement, right? Like Parker, if you don't vote for Joe Biden, Trump's gonna win. Like, first of all, that's not inherently true.
Yeah.
Especially like if you live in New York, let's say, which we don't.
Yeah.
But if you live in New York, I mean, that's certain. Joe Biden's certainly going to win New York. I mean, it is definitely going to win California. You know, all these things. Like, so even our system of voting makes it so, like, votes don't really matter, or individual votes don't really matter in a large way.
Yeah. Yes.
But also presenting this either or kind of fallacy that says, like, your choices are. Um, not have any of your principles or policy ideals represented by person A, or the same thing with person B, but person B says mean things publicly sometimes.
Yeah.
And I mean, Joe Biden says mean things
That's
publicly.
what pisses me off. Like, I'm sick of the whole, like, Bernie supporters, you need to compromise now. It's between these two. You don't have a say. And, like, Bernie was the compromise.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were voting for Bernie because they wanted to one day overthrow Bernie. That's the whole point of not me, us. It's the point is, like, one day.
I don't know if that was.
Well, that's
I don't know
how
if
a
that was
lot of
strictly
people
the
took
point,
it.
but yes, you know, for radicals like us,
Yes.
certainly, we see, you know. Go ahead. Actually, don't let me cut you off.
I forgot what I was saying.
Well, like, just if you're not being represented, why is that legitimate? There's this thing in this kind of bourgeois representative democracy that says, like, if it's not your guy this year, you know, in 2 or 4 years, maybe it'll be your guy, and then maybe you won't die.
Keep playing. Try again next time.
A treatable, you know, medical condition or something. It's this strange alienation from everything. I mean, we're alienated from each other, and why wouldn't we be alienated from, you know, power? But I'll get into some of the, like, weeds of why that's beyond a dumb argument to just say, like, Trump would be worse. You have to pick Trump. But kind of the simple explanation is that there's, with the neoliberal consensus, there's nothing saying that in terms of material conditions, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of shifting power structures, that Trump is any different than Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And I would also say that when you have someone like Trump, and you have CNN and MSNBC and all these other liberal bourgeois media outlets just, like, railing on Trump 24/7, usually about things that, like, don't matter, or presenting it, not that they don't matter, but presenting it in a way that, like, misses the point largely. Like with Russiagate, what happens is when you have a Joe Biden or an Obama in there, there's very, like, weak, if any, criticisms of things like the drone war,
Yeah.
of things like energy policy, which is going to be important going forward.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's remember, while we're in this global pandemic, we also have climate change going on.
We are also in a climate crisis.
We have the shale oil industry, like, essentially never having made a profit, and the debt crisis within it looming. We have huge issues that need to be sorted out. And that was the point, is, you know, Bernie might be the person that listens enough, that's responsive enough to the people, that we can actually, even though we like his policy set, if there's something we don't like, or if there's something more that we need, like, we would have a responsive representative in the highest office in government.
Yeah.
Joe Biden's not that guy. He's going to do what Goldman Sachs wants him to do, much like Obama did. And they're going to sell you the same guilt trip and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
And
well, and Bernie supporters supported him for his policies.
yeah.
And Biden does not have policies that are like Bernie's at all.
Right. I mean, we don't want to die of, like, you know,
A preventable disease.
yeah, or from being unhoused
Yeah.
in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, and things like that. Like, and we don't want people in the global south to die because of needless sanctions, which is something I'll get into as well in a little bit. But in any case, thanks for playing, Bernie. It was a good try. But I guess we're gonna replay the whole Hillary fiasco again. So.
Yeah.
So, which kind of brings us to the next point, which is like, what do we do instead of funneling things through electoral politics instead of only caring about things every 4 years? Like, not only are there organizations that are doing things all the time. And you should definitely look those up. I mean, there's political parties, there's kind of groups that do collective action, like we saw in New York with the transit or the metro direct actions.
Mm-hmm.
There's and as this applies to our crisis right now, there's a huge amount of mutual aid going on throughout the country. There's, if you look on It's Going Down, I mean, they have an enormous list of mutual aid that's going on in every state. So this is what's important right now. In terms of the future, maybe we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, so Maddie's mad.
I'm very mad.
I guess this ties in a little bit. Anyway, so we have here. Yeah, yesterday we were talking about this Michael Roberts article. Where he's discussing kind of the impact of containment and kind of the economic shockwaves that are being felt and going to start being felt. But something I didn't get to cover, which I want to underscore, is I'll kind of go back a little bit. And what he was saying was it's clear many people in small businesses are not qualifying for the handouts for various reasons and will fall through the safety net. Like many people won't be able to get the supports, even many small businesses. 58% of American workers won't be able to pay rent, buy groceries, or take care of bills if quarantined for 30 days. 1 in 5 workers say they'd be unable to meet those basic financial needs in less than 1 week under quarantine. Half of small businesses in the U.S. can't afford to pay employees for a full month under quarantine conditions. More than half of small businesses expect to see a loss in revenue somewhere between 10 to 30%. Many people are being forced to work, putting their health at risk because they can't work at home like better paid office-based workers. So the thing I really wanted to underscore here, and this is important, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about how this ties into why Joe Biden, the things Joe Biden and Trump don't differentiate on, which is economic policy that really matters. Also foreign policy in a lot of ways, but here when he says many small businesses in travel, retail, and services will never come back after the lockdowns end. Even large companies in retail, travel, and energy could well go bust, causing a cascade effect through sectors of economies. For example, the U.S. Federal Reserve requires banks to run stress tests that assume certain bad scenarios to make sure the banks can weather a market downturn. The worst case scenario had GDP falling by 9.9% in quarter 2 2020, with unemployment jumping to 10% by quarter 3 2021. Based upon recent estimates from Goldman Sachs, GDP will likely fall over 30%, and unemployment could end up at a similar level within weeks. So this is what we're seeing is a huge contraction of a hyper financialized economy, largely because a huge part of it is consumer spending, and also the unemployment rate is going to go higher than the Great Depression, and so we can talk about the policies that they're implementing, expanded benefits, all these things, but just frankly, like, some people aren't going to get them. It's not inherently universal, and they talk as if it is. It's the same way they talked about the testing, right? It's the same way they talked about coronavirus testing. It was like, anybody that wants one can get one free of charge, except if you want one.
Or if you think you need one.
Right. You might not get tested unless you fall into certain categories. And at least from my experience, it would have cost somewhere around $50, $60, which is prohibitive.
Yeah, not everybody has that.
Yeah, I mean,
especially not when they've been out of work for a fucking month.
Yeah, well, that's the point, isn't it? Also, a large part of this whole we're going to do an economic recovery thing is to try to stabilize markets and get people to stop doing like money runs, or increase like like to get companies to stop doing money runs, and to also kind of stabilize those financial markets, because like saying like people will be able to pay their crushing debt, don't worry about it, but it's a way to kind of print money and funnel it back to the financial sector. So the thing I mainly want to talk about in this first part is how while labor is being liquidated, right? And we are, essentially. I mean, some people's jobs are not coming back.
They don't exist anymore.
Yeah, and that's a very stressful time, and solidarity with you if you're going through that right now. That's tough. It's tough enough to face all of this. And to have to worry like when this is over and when these like benefits dry up, if you're going to have a job, which is the way that you're able to reproduce yourself economically. So like that's your survival. So saying like, okay, well, when coronavirus is no longer a problem, maybe your survival will be in question due to all the latent social and economic barriers that are in place that we didn't resolve. So that's largely my problem with treating this like it's something that exists outside of this system. Like, one of the reasons it's been so bad and going to be so bad is A, lack of preparation, B, we just don't have the infrastructure in place for something like this.
Yeah, well, and also with the amount of people without health insurance, people are reluctant to get tested even if they feel sick, so...
Yeah. So there's, it's the health factors. It's 500,000 people being unhoused throughout the nation, which is fucking criminal. It's wealth disparities. It's forcing people to go into unsafe conditions so that they can clean your floor for $8 an hour, and then be like, you're a hero. And they don't really mean it. I mean, it's the same way we say, like, whatever. They're just saying a hero so they don't have to do anything for you. You're a hero in that you are trying to survive under an oppressive economic system.
They're calling you a hero when what you are is a sacrifice
Right.
that was decided by the elite class.
Exactly, and you're doing the same thing you always done. Like the precarity level has been pushed up significantly, but the latent precarity that we all live under as working class people, the baseline is already so high that once this gets removed, if we're just going back to normal, like that's there are going to be cascading effects through this. So we hope that people like radicalize and begin to make demands. But I think this is why we see the federal government and legislators trying to do these kind of like we'll boost people's wages for the next 4 months or the next year even or whatever. But really what we should be talking about is permanent solutions. Because if we're going to treat it like once this is over, it's back to like this, social Darwinism.
Yeah, and it misses the point that like this country was not built to withstand something like this, and that's a fucking problem.
Yeah. Well, it would be hard enough to withstand something like this in a country where you had social bonds and supports and economic stability for the majority of people, and work was restructured, and basic necessities of life were able to be met without largely forcing underpaid and underprivileged people to perform those tasks in a hyper risky environment for no more pay and for no real net benefit. This is the point. Okay, so essentially what happens is if you want to rob, what we need to talk about is our relationship to capital or to power, certainly, and maybe we can use that as shorthand, but our relationship to private capital and how we adjust that, how we adjust our relationship to power, certainly, if we're talking economic power, well, any power, but in this specific case, economic power. So how we change that. This is, when we see calls for like a UBI, yes, it would be great to universally, and the only proper way to do it would be universally, offer somebody or everybody $1,000 a month, right? Yeah, like who wouldn't want that? Now there are all these caveats and whatever, like gouging a social safety net, and the kind of value-added tax portion of it. But see, these are the solutions that don't shift power, and that's the point. They can give you all the cash you want because they control production and distribution. Your landlord can raise the rental he wants.
Yeah.
The supermarket can charge whatever they want. You still only have one way to obtain these goods and services and all the necessities of life. They haven't changed anything for you in a profound way. So while it is helpful, it's mostly to keep capital circulating. So why we are often given money in terms of like a bailout, not a bailout, but in terms of like stimulus and things like this is because how the system works is we funnel that right back into the hands of private capital, either through commodity purchasing or simply like
paying your bills
and requiring the necessities of life. And that transaction there that's happening is saying that the system can't support you to obtain the necessities of life inherently, but these things that then we should realize should be given away freely, should be able to be obtained freely, like housing, food, clothing, I would say, healthcare, certainly, even like productive work you enjoy. We don't have to get tied up on like what the definition of work is, but work you enjoy, fulfilling, labor. Whatever that means. These are the necessities of life. And you can only obtain that as the kind of those who have power decide you can. And they will give you the means to access them on their terms because they control it all, and you have to go through them to access it. So you don't have any net benefit here. You're not gaining anything. You just didn't die that day. And you might not die that month. And that's the transaction that's happening here, is they're saying, okay, granted, maybe you are a human being who deserves to live. But, like only during this crisis will we recognize that, because it would be politically unpopular to say otherwise, even though there are people saying otherwise effectively. And so what we will do is allow you to access these things through this system which created the material conditions that caused this suffering to begin with. So nothing has changed. And this is largely the problem. So when we talk about stealing labor share of the profits or labor share of value on the grand scale, like when you financialize the entire economy, when you have even small businesses basically working on debt for private equity, let's say. Everything is debt-based. When you have people who don't own their homes or did own their homes and now they have a reverse mortgage or a second mortgage or whatever. And then we talk about what are healthcare premiums. None of us have health insurance, right? I don't. You do for a month. Maddie does for a month.
And then I don't.
And then it's gone. It's all right. I'm sure there's nothing going on that would.
Yeah, why would I need health care in a month or two?
Right. So beyond the obvious things, right? Of should healthcare, even not accessing it, because that's what we're going to talk about in a second, right? About health insurance. But should healthcare itself cost anything? We can have that argument, certainly. I would say no, but I also believe everything should be decommodified because there are better ways to produce and distribute things, certainly. That don't create like hierarchies and classes and are prohibitive to whoever the society deems less valuable. In insurance, Parker, let me ask you, what are you paying for exactly? Like, what's the net benefit of having health insurance, of paying for
it? I can't really. I had no benefit. That's my own personal thing.
When's the last time you had health insurance?
A couple of years ago. Because they had the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, so I kind of had to have. Or else, deal with the penalty. And I dealt with a penalty even though I had it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't use it.
Well, that's interesting. Do you want to talk about that real quick? What happened there? Because here's the distinction I want to make. I don't want to cut you off, but the distinction I want to make right here is there's a lot of people who talk about universal health care, which means many things to many different people. You could institute universal health care by saying everyone has to have health care, and we will cap the cost at $10,000 a year, let's say, right? That's not single payer health care, and that's certainly maybe you call that like affordable healthcare, but I would say
there are people who make 12 grand a year. Are you fucking kidding me?
Well, and then we go, well, they would be on Medicaid anyway. And anyway, so, but yes, go on. Let's, because I want to get to that, how people are kind of trapped in this, they're not poor enough to access Medicaid, right? And they're not rich enough to be able to actually pay for health insurance. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So, basically, the entire time I had it, I couldn't use it because I would go to the doctor, and I couldn't use this healthcare I'm paying for. And then, of course, I made too much money that year, so I paid back. What the hell is that thing called?
The subsidy?
Yeah, the subsidy.
So what?
Pay that back.
Why couldn't you use the healthcare? Was it because your insurance didn't cover that hospital or that provider?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, well, it's also cost prohibitive as well, with copays and things of that nature. It may seem ridiculous to some people, and I'm not saying this will happen necessarily in your circumstance, but some people scoff at the fact that you might have a $40 copay. If you're already paying a couple of hundred up to some people $900 a month in health insurance premiums. I mean, $40 is a lot of money.
And then you have a deductible to meet if you actually really need to use that health care.
I mean, yeah, you break your arm, you're gonna pay for it. You're gonna pay that $4,000 that it costs.
Yeah.
It's meaningless to pay that premium in that result, and this is the point. So, do you remember how much you had to pay back in those subsidies?
Well, I didn't get. It took my my whole tax check.
Okay, so yeah, you just basically had no tax refund that year.
Yeah.
Which go ahead. Sir.
Which people like us, we kind of depend upon that.
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Get ahead of something, or you have money saved for this project spring or whatever.
Especially in a tourist economy where winters are, or the tax return season is your dead season, and your hours are getting cut, and you need that money.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was like, fuck.
Yeah. Well, and your wages are already stolen from by your boss. That's extracted as profit. And so then, the smaller amount, which is taxes, and then it's returned sometimes with extra, depending on what bracket you fall in, because this is the kind of pathetic way we try to redistribute money. And then we see how neoliberal policies, right-wing policies, like the Affordable Care Act, trap people into this ceiling, which is, yes, we will help you, but if you make, a couple $100 too much this year, you will lose. The floor falls out. So, what's your net benefit there? You lost on that hugely.
Right. And I didn't even get to go to the doctor.
Right. Yeah, and you didn't use it.
Yeah.
It was something you didn't use, that you require in case, right? But you didn't use. So money was extracted from you for no net benefit. In fact, you lost.
Taken more as a penalty.
And this is my point. This is one way that you extract value from the working class, okay? So that you capture the value you create at work in your productive capacity, okay? A large portion of that is already captured by your boss, by your employer, as surplus value, essentially, but as profit. That's what we refer to as profit. They steal from you every day. You create more value than you are paid back in wages every day. I don't care what industry it is. It's 100% true. Okay. What's up? So you already have, are already apportioned a small amount of the value you create.
Mm-hmm.
So when you hyper financialize entire economies and you make everything transactional, when you have things like healthcare, you can recapture. I said that word weird. You can I'm so focused on not like turning into a steam whistle. You can recapture even more of that value that you had to give your worker, or just the capitalist class in general. This is how this system stays self-contained in a lot of ways. It's not necessarily always your boss extracting all the value. It's how this system keeps your value within it, and you stay alienated from the value of what you produce and from society at large in terms of how you reproduce yourself in a liberated way. You have to work within their systems, essentially. So one of the ways you recapture the value, the surplus value that you couldn't extract because you had to pay it to the worker as wages, one of the ways the capitalist class claws that back is through things like health insurance. Yeah. Where they financialize healthcare, where you have to pay an upfront cost just to maybe be able to access where they say you can access.
And they tie it to your employment.
And it's largely tied to employment, yes. I mean, that's not universal.
Yeah.
But it's largely tied to employment. And that's another way to keep wages down. Because when things like unions fight for higher wages, let's say, or the first fight is always going to be things like health insurance. It's going to be basic needs.
That's what people need.
And there are multiple factors in there, and some of it has to do with power within union structures and stuff too. But the point is, like, that's not a net benefit to you for your employer to give you health insurance. It seems like one. But essentially what they're doing is they're literally taking the surplus value that they've extracted from what you've created. Mm-hmm. And instead of giving it to you, which they could apparently, because they're going to give it to Aetna.
They have that money to give to someone.
Right. They're going to give it to a private insurer. So they have that money they could pay you as wages. And they get tax breaks and stuff for doing this and whatever. But that's the point, is you lose value by being paid a wage because you don't get the full value of what you're producing. And after the fact, everything is hyper-financialized to keep you from essentially ever shifting classes, ever truly owning anything, and ever being truly outside of this kind of precarious system, which says housing has to cost money. So you have to keep working. You want to change jobs, maybe? You're unhappy with this job. Maybe your employer, has bad safety. Maybe your employer is not taking this pandemic seriously and putting you in unsafe situations. What are you going to do? Quit? You got a mortgage to pay.
You need to eat, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, that costs money, does it? So then we see, if you remember, I think we've all seen these graphs. You see the graph of productivity, right? Since whatever, I don't remember.
Pick a date.
Yeah, since ever, let's say. Productivity versus real wages. And productivity is like this, and real wages are like this. It's flat.
Not moving.
Right. So your real wages haven't changed in 60 years. And your relationship to capital really hasn't changed. In fact, it's been clawed back largely.
And you're producing way more.
Yes, and collectively we're producing way more. And some of that, there's a lot of reasons behind that. But what filled that gap between productivity and real wages was credit, essentially. So you got, they had to keep you spending because they need you to buy commodities. We see right now with the crisis of demand how bad it is when people stop buying commodities. I mean, for the capitalist class. We see kind of what a general strike would look like in some ways. And that's on the production end. But we see what it looks like when these things stop circulating. So that's why you're given a wage, is to keep it flowing throughout this system, right? If they could pay you nothing, they would pay you nothing. They would find a way to reinstitute chattel slavery and tell you how good it is for you and be like, we provide you a house and we provide you food. And like, yeah, it's like, gruel in your house, like you can't pick where it is and whatever.
It's full of mold.
Yeah. But, I mean, and we can argue about the differences of whatever, but, I mean, there's not a broad gap between chattel slavery and wage slavery. And I know some people get really kind of triggered by that, but, I mean, read a Frederick Douglass quote. And consider for a minute how you are trapped by the system and how everything you interact with is coercion and not voluntary. I mean, this is one of the reasons, we say, like, somebody who has power over you in an employment environment, right, can't say, like, hit on you, right? To extrapolate this a little bit, if I was your boss and I have power over you, it would be wrong for me to use that power, let's say, to try to engage in a romantic relationship with you because of the power imbalance. That would be coercion in some ways, right? And we deal with coercive things like that all the time. That's the system we live in, is coercion. So there is recognition of it in some cases, even though it's not taken very seriously, frankly, as it should be, especially with women. And that has largely to do because you need to create further subjugated subclasses for the people above those subjugated subclasses to feel like they're superior in some ways. Or like, at least I'm not as bad as Maddie has it, or as Parker has it, because I'm whatever. I am a shift leader or something, or I'm a man, or I'm white, or whatever. These are all very false things made to make us feel superior, so that we don't question the system that controls all of us, or the majority of us, certainly. But so we see these things like in a Biden administration. These sorts of things aren't going to be beneficial. He's going to have the same economic policies. He's going to listen to whatever Goldman Sachs has to say. Okay, maybe he wouldn't have someone like Steve Mnuchin on, as Treasury Secretary or something. But Timothy Geithner under Obama, that's not a huge difference. I mean, we could talk about the order of magnitude of difference there, but that's the point. It's all very superficial differences.
Because he said it himself, fundamentally nothing will change. And when the world around us is drastically changing, that is not an okay option.
Yeah, well, and beyond the world, whether the world's changing or not, right? There are some, irreconcilable things that we have to deal with within this system that continue to throw our lives into chaos. And the point is, like, this is an illusion of choice at best. So to kind of tie that into, like, this neoliberal consensus says, like, economically, you don't have a choice. Like, you're going to choose A or B, and they both largely have the same economic policy. And even if it varies in degree, it's going to achieve the same ends, which is to continue to subjugate you, to continue to wage class warfare, to continue to drive things towards the worst possible outcome. And that's in the country that they represent, that they say they're proud to be from, and whatever, and the constituency they say they represent, all the things. So I think it's easy to imagine why these people have such terrible foreign policy. They don't even care about you or you. They certainly don't care about 1 million dead Iraqis. They don't care about the people that sanctions kill in Iran and Venezuela and Cuba. They don't care about anybody. It's all about, like, the bottom line. It is literally
stock market.
Yeah, it is a numbers game. They are appealing to dark gods, and I want to be crystal clear here. I want to be crystal clear. There is no difference between the energy policy, the climate change policy, you could call it, but these things are interrelated. There is no difference between what Donald Trump would do and what Joe Biden would do. There's no difference. They both are going to do whatever the energy industry tells them to do. That's the point. That's what we liked about Bernie Sanders. We liked the policy set, but we also liked that he was telling private capital to sit the fuck down and shut the fuck up.
And that they should be scared because we're coming for them.
Yes, and you don't have another choice. I mean, I'm gonna vote Green Party again.
Yeah, I'm not voting for either of those two.
But they're not gonna win because it is a one-party state. It is a one-party state, and if you have any confusion of that at this point, you need to please wake up and look at the material conditions on the ground. Nancy Pelosi doesn't care about you. Barack Obama didn't care about you. He didn't, like, Elizabeth Warren didn't care about you. We just revise things constantly because we like to think the conditions change. But they don't. And it's very easy to fool people by manipulating commodities into feeling like they have some quality of life. And then when you see a crisis like this, I think it's laid pretty bare that quality of life is not only precarious but not guaranteed, and certainly, like, made of it's an illusion.
Yeah.
It's made of glass.
Yeah, it's
stardust.
It's fake. It's sugar, man. Yeah. It's sugar. It's
sugar
like,
to make the poison go down.
It's like this pink lemonade.
Yeah. I noticed you're having some pink drink.
Yes, I like pink lemonade. Now, if I was to be like, pink lemonade is intrinsically better than yellow lemonade. And I'm going to base all my life decisions and all these sorts of things off of that fact. That would be kind of stupid, wouldn't you say? Because largely pink lemonade and regular lemonade are the same thing. Go again?
I said, because you're not even giving yellow lemonade a chance.
Well, yellow lemonade is inherently reactionary.
That's true.
It's responsible for terrible things. Yeah, bad metaphor probably, but you get my point. It doesn't matter the color of the war criminal.
Yeah.
Let's not have any more war criminals. And people go, what are you, stupid?
Just pick the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, I like the moment when people, without introspection, go, if you're going to say we can't have a war criminal as president, that's going to be, you're not going to have many choices.
You're not giving us many options.
I get the narrow criteria, but there's a lot of them out there.
And that doesn't give you a moment to be like, huh, I wonder if that says anything about our society.
It should be like a light bulb moment.
It's crazy, man. It's crazy. It's crazy. Um, anyway. So I think I'm going to keep coming back to this, and that's why we have this kind of series. And I would like to honestly get more people who aren't me talking about their experiences through the lens of their material conditions. Not to be like exploitative, like sometimes people are, be like, look at the immiseration this person lives in. Like I don't want to do it in that way. I want to kind of build the reality here because. This kind of false lives we've been living for a long time, thinking like infinite growth was possible, and thinking that like we had it pretty good, and blah blah blah, and all these wine mom and dads that post like wispy. Miss you Obama memes on Facebook and stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's time to kind of point out that is a bullshit reality you are living in. And we should talk about the actual conditions and how we can change them. And maybe we can get into that a little bit. But yeah. Parker, is there any good news right now? You're our good news guy, so if there's no good news, I would like you all to blame Parker. Yeah, nothing.
I ain't got good news.
I was hoping we would get some angry phone calls of being like, you
need to hold your nose and vote for Biden.
I got plenty of angry tweets earlier, and then I said about 2 things and they stopped. It's very easy to point out the flaws in some of their concepts here. Where was that fucking thing I was going to bring up? There it is. So no good news then.
Oh, bro, I ain't got any good news.
How are you weathering this? There it is. How are you weathering the crisis? Watch any good movies? Seen any good shows?
Let's see. I'm on the 4th season of The Expanse now.
Nice. Yeah, we'll have to get into that sometime. There are some definite, distinct parallels between that show and what's going on right now.
Yeah, especially like now. We'll get the spoilers with that next time.
Yes. All right. Go ahead, sorry.
I watched Puka Lives the other night.
What is that? Wait, that's Garfield's teddy bear, right?
I think that was a puka.
What is that?
On Hulu, they got these like sort of like how Netflix makes like horror movies sometimes, or original movies or something. Hulu does it too, and they made this movie called Puka like a year or so ago.
Yeah.
Basically, this dude dresses up and loses his mind while he's playing this mascot called Puka. This is kind of a continuation of it in a way. It was interesting. This is what I was in reference to my Facebook post. Create a fucking tulpa, you idiot.
Gotcha. I was wondering what that was because what is that? I missed out on all the references, you know? It hit my brain, and my brain was like, nope.
Um,
what is it, Tulpi?
A tulpa.
Tulpa. What is that?
The mythical creature, basically, it's a creature that's created out of a legend, and the more people believe in it, the more real it becomes.
Ah, yes.
Like Tinkerbell.
Okay.
Exactly like Tinkerbell.
Yes, that's exactly what we're trying to defeat here on the claw. The tulpa of ruling class hegemony. The more you believe in it, the realer it becomes. How do you defeat one?
I don't know if there is a definitive way to defeat it. So they didn't defeat it in this. When they fought a tulpa, they burnt down the area where the symbol for a tulpa was left.
Yeah.
And then they also had they wrote the story different, so the tulpa would just die.
Okay.
I don't know.
Huh. Well, apparently you can't defeat one. So hopefully our efforts are more fruitful here than fighting that legendary beast.
I like to think of it maybe like in counter energies. This is one energy signature. We gotta throw a counter one out there. Yeah. We get it strong enough, we're gonna beat it back.
Yeah, just beat it off with both hands.
Title your sex tape.
So one way you can defeat the legendary beast of coronavirus and capitalist austerity in general is with mutual aid. So I'm not going to scroll through the whole thing because it's through every single state. I encourage people to check it out. I will put it in the show notes so you can check it out. But if you go to itsgoingdown.org, you'll see they have a COVID-19 mutual aid list, and there's also resources there and some recommended readings. So if you're in Vermont, there are several mutual aid hubs in Vermont. Food, transportation, housing, emotional support. And there's also in New Hampshire on the seacoast and Manchester as well. So if you can help out and you're in those areas, I definitely recommend you look that up. And like I said, it's in every single state. And if you can create some of these things, get involved in your community, and even something as simple as going out to the grocery store for people who are high risk, to be able to help them avoid that risk. Or like we were talking about yesterday, right? With the you were saying something about single moms.
Yeah, because you can only you can't bring kids into the store. It's one person per family. So now single moms are trying to find someone to from a safe social distance, stand outside their car and watch their child while they're in the store.
Right. So some of these sorts of things, and then you can have these relationships built within the community so that you don't have to rely on strangers necessarily and try to build this in the middle of
a crisis.
Although we are there. Yeah. So however, there's also mutual aid funds where they're kind of pooling funds. If you don't know what a mutual aid fund or a solidarity fund is, definitely look that up and start one. It's not easy to do, but it is necessary.
If you can't start one, donate to one if you have the means to do so.
Exactly. If somebody's already running one in your area, help them out. And if there isn't one in your area and you are one of these people, even though like I don't know anybody in our circles necessarily, but if you're somebody who has extra money to throw around and you're driving yourself crazy because you're sitting at home and you're not able to buy commodities to fill that hole in your heart.
You could do something good.
Yeah, you
Help
could
people.
do a lot of good. You could do a ton of good. Take all that money you've been hiding under your mattress and give it to people who really need it. Because we will all need help at some point, especially if this keeps dragging on. But we also see in Massachusetts, there's a lot. I mean, the situation in Massachusetts is a little out of control, but there's a lot of, it looks like, mutual aid funds for purchasing food, medical supplies, and other necessities. And kind of being able to distribute them throughout the community. But something as simple as like checking in on people and seeing if they need anything. Even something as simple as saying like, I mean, sharing toilet paper certainly, but like being, tell me what you need that you haven't been able to find. So that people don't have to go to the store every day to try to find something, right? I think we run that risk a little bit. If you're in desperate need of toilet paper, you're probably, like, you shouldn't, but, like, I understand what would lead to this type of behavior, where you, like, go every single day to try to find some when the truck drops it off and blah, blah, blah. The point here being, like, if you have a group that like one person goes once a day, not the same person, but you split it up, then essentially, they can keep the extra eye and you're not exposing yourself to extra risk or exposing other people to extra risk. And if you need eggs and suddenly the eggs are there, they can get them for you, whatever. Like, we get how this works, but the point is, like, we're gonna have to lean on each other, and the state and private capital are not going to help us in a profound way. And the amount of people they will let slip through the cracks should be troubling to all of us. And I've seen it since the beginning, but I'm seeing it in a very broad way of people who, for one reason or another, are frustrated with this quarantine situation, even though in America it's not, depending on where you are. In most places it's not very restrictive, it's mostly voluntary. Like, the National Guard isn't out for the most part.
Police aren't stopping you, asking for like a pass for where you're going.
Right. In some places they are, for sure. And that's not where we should be at with this. We don't want to turn into a police state. We need to create the material conditions on the ground that allow people to stay at home. We need to have the systems of distribution that allow people to stay home. People are doing this because out of necessity mostly, or because there are such weak social bonds that we are all so atomized that we go, what the hell do I care? I just want to get out, and there's a million excuses for why people do it. They're like, I'm sure everybody else is doing it, and blah, blah, blah. And some places, frankly, don't care. They think it's not a real thing or not a big deal, or we've all had it, and we shouldn't worry about it, and blah, blah, blah. But I'm seeing a lot of people that are already frustrated with this and saying, like, it's time to just throw it in. Like, whatever.
We're not even doing it the right way right now. Like, if we stop now, it's going to get so much worse.
Well, and also,
we need to be doing better now.
The dangerous thing about this as well is the better we do, okay, the less people die, which is a good thing, okay? The less people die, the easier it is for someone who doesn't want to participate in the kind of social distancing protocols and these sorts of things to say, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Nobody's dying.
We've talked about that before. Like, that's the fucking point.
Yes. If this all goes well, that will be the feeling we all have.
You should feel like it was for nothing.
Yes, because nobody died. That would be a good thing. The alternative here is a lot of people dying. So I don't want to hear any more about how hard this is. Of course it's hard. But the hard things, like, until you've had the virus, either in your body or in someone you genuinely care about, I don't want to hear a goddamn word from you about you think what your timetable is to get back to normal. And the normal we want to get back to, I don't want to go back to.
Yeah.
And it created the conditions on the ground for this. So I don't know if this is a preview of the 2020 election, but you know, people's mood is they just want to create the conditions that led to crisis over and over and over and over. While I am very heartened by the amount of militant labor action that's going on right now, and solidarity with everyone that's taking part in that, but I also have an eye on that sort of ideology because I feel like it's going to come into play in this next election, and almost certainly Donald Trump will win again.
Yep.
But also, if we remember, just to circle back to this, if we remember my point earlier was it really doesn't matter because it's going to be the same irrational, cruel world either way. So it's up to us to change it. Bernie Sanders was never going to save us from that. He at best could have mitigated some of the cruelty.
He would have...
Or stood out of the way.
Yeah, he would have lessened the struggle a little bit.
Right. That would have been the best part, is he might have stood out of the way while we got our demands met. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, it seems like he's going to fall in line and
again.
Yeah. And play the game some more. So bye-bye. But thanks for playing. It was a good run. However, one of the things, if we can kind of mentally circle back to, it feels like forever ago, but like a month ago, when there were still actually multiple candidates in this race.
You mean in March, the month that never ended?
Yeah. One of the things that should be abundantly clear is that most Americans, or most people, it would seem, who vote and who talk about politics, who would be classified as liberal or conservative or like proud Democrats or proud Republicans, they don't care about foreign policy. If they care about foreign policy, it's in a very kind of exploitative and colonist way. It's this neocolonialism and imperialism kind of framework that they're often working within. So one thing we want to talk about is let me pull it up here. See, I told you I have too many windows. There. This is from Counterpunch. It's an article that says, "Amid plague, sanctions or genocide." So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially, sanctions have long been indefensible. Now in the time of COVID-19, more so than ever, nor are they some minor phenomena. Over a quarter of humanity lives under U.S. economic sanctions. That means millions of people lack untroubled access to food and medicines during a lethal pestilence. Thus, in Iran, where the government fears millions of deaths from COVID, sanctions amount to genocide. Under ordinary circumstances, these embargoes are economic warfare. By putting Iran and Venezuela under economic siege even before the pandemic, the U.S. had murdered tens of thousands of those countries' citizens. Yet most Americans seem unaware or unconcerned about this sadistic, criminal, and murderous policy inflicted on millions in their name. And I definitely encourage people to read this article, but I want to talk about it kind of in a general sense, So that's on Counterpunch. It's Amid Plague, Sanctions Are Genocide by E. Ottenberg. This is largely the point. Often economic warfare is, well, first and foremost, what we need to realize is when we talk about working class values and working class liberation, we need to talk about the global working class. And when we talk about the capitalist class and the evils and violence that they propagate, we talk about the global capitalist class, even though most of the global evildoers are in America or belong to American corporations or have interests
in America
relating to American policy. Yes. Regardless, often, and I saw this a lot with liberals and Warren supporters, especially peace supporters. These kind of almost nationalist liberals. The concept that they feel like sanctions are basically what you do instead of war. Okay, that it's not war, that it doesn't hurt anyone. Mm-hmm. It just hurts like the bad people in the government, like Putin.
Yeah.
Or like Maduro, who's a dictator because whatever Elizabeth Warren said he was, or even Bernie said he was. Like, okay. And that's neither here nor there. And I don't know how much that's up to us to decide in some ways. But, or, even in North Korea, Venezuela, certainly Cuba, things of that nature have been going on for a long time. With Cuba, we can talk about how we isolated them economically, and while we were blowing up petrochemical plants and doing all sorts of terrorist activities inside their country during the Kennedy administration. But then you see a lot of the criticisms of socialism that come from Venezuela, you're gonna run out of toilet paper, pal.
Where is
that is a crisis of production mainly. And distribution certainly, but due to the way the world is structured. So part of the problem here, a lot of the kind of grief socialism catches for the hardships that some socialist countries have had to endure is because of just brutal economic sanctions. I mean, besides the coups and murders and overthrows of governments and assassinations and supporting fascist genocidal maniacs in these countries because it was good for corporate interests. We see that the failures of these socialist countries is really a failure of not enough socialism. Is really a failure of not enough socialized productive and distributive capacity, and coupled with private capital's too much control by private capital that's weaponized by countries like the United States, by Western countries against the global South largely when it tries to do things like support its own people. We want to extract those resources, and the best way to do that is to immiserate people, get them to put some sort of corporatist fascist in charge, and then it's fairly easy to take whatever you want. I mean, name a resource and you can find where we've done this. And it's not always about necessarily extracting them. Sometimes it's just about controlling them, even if you leave it in the ground or whatever. It's just like having ownership of that. It's being able to control the speculation of things and all that. But the point is economic warfare, which is what sanctions are. And certainly what things like embargoes are, and blocking aid and supplies going to countries like we have with Iran, like we have with Cuba, like we have with Venezuela. If we remember with Venezuela, it was like, we will give them aid, but it has to be on our terms, and we're going to do it through like USAID. And there are ways we could provide aid that would make it through. But literally, like they had people who were architects of like the Iraq War, for example, or architects of previous coups. And if we look at in Latin America, and if we they're hiding weapons in aid crates. Like that's no. So whether someone's a dictator or not, and mostly in these circumstances, they rarely are in the true definition of the term, becomes kind of meaningless in this point. Because what it's really about is starving people to death until they conform to your terms. We see that a lot with Palestine. In some ways. What are you pointing to?
Someone commented on our live stream.
Oh, it's your mom. Maddie's mom is commenting.
I wasn't going to reveal her identity.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a second. But it's not. There's no distinction, truly, between killing someone through starving them out and killing someone through overt warfare. So, like, I don't want to hear any more of these like distinctions being made of like, yeah, like, yeah, she supported sanctions. Elizabeth Warren supported sanctions in Venezuela, but she's a progressive. She cares about people. She cares about women's rights. Yeah, how many women died under sanctions in, say, Venezuela? And how that coup that she supported in Bolivia, where they ousted the indigenous president in order to prop up a Christian fascist. Okay. What?
He's crying.
Okay, well, what are you asking me for? Can you turn the volume down?
It's all the way down.
Okay. To prop up a Christian, my son's crying. To prop.
I got it.
Sorry, I got thrown off my roll. It's hard to say you're a women's rights candidate if you're ousting. Or even like a progressive, whatever that word means. It has no meaning. If it ever did have meaning, it doesn't anymore. If you support, economic policies that starve people to death, or if you support things like staging right-wing Christian fascist coups in places like Bolivia, you're not progressive. And at best, if you have like progressive policies inside the United States, but we can't have that for the whole world. Then you are a nationalist. That is the creep of fascism. Yeah. And this is the problem. If we're not taking it seriously and we're saying, well, like good intentions are all that matter. Intentions are meaningless in a lot of ways, especially because the intent in a lot of these policies is to cause harm. But yes, so and we could also, just before I forget, something that never was discussed broadly when Elizabeth Warren was running. And I know she's gone and blah, 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 but she's still in the Senate, and we're still going to have to hear her talk about, like, falling behind Joe Biden, or, like, we all need to come together and blah, 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 or how, like, Joe Biden's going to adopt some of her ideas. I want to remind you what some of her ideas were. Not only did she support the coup in Bolivia, not only did she support sanctions and economic warfare, but you might want to go and read her policy that was baked into her Medicare for All proposal, which was not a Medicare for All proposal, and see what she recommended be done about the maternal death rate, which is essentially punish hospitals that she wanted to
that
sanction.
have high death rates.
She was going to sanction poor hospitals that have high death rates. Now, if we don't have a class analysis, if we don't understand material conditions, you can say neoliberal bullshit like that, and it seems like it works. But also, it didn't work in education, and it's certainly not going to work in healthcare.
Yeah.
But if we understand the conditions, the for-profit conditions, first of all, but also the material conditions that relate to adverse outcomes, especially with communities of color, with women of color, and with women in general in this country because of the healthcare model that we have. And we say, well, if women die, what we're going to do is we're going to remove funding so that more women
will die.
Yes. It's crazy. And why that wasn't, it was never a question out of debate. Nobody
mentioned it.
I mean, I'm sure somebody has. I'm sure like Brunig or somebody talked about it. But
it was never like a big scandal.
No. and she never faced that question. And that's the point. These are the people that were saying like, they're good. They got Biden's ear. They're good people. Mm-hmm. These are the people we regard as moral and principled and just. And I'm honestly not really interested in having the morality argument, because if you're operating under the illusion that this system is rational or good or can be reformed, it's not even a question of morality beyond that. You genuinely aren't in touch with humanity. And the system itself is so corrupt and immoral and designed to do exactly this, to break people, to exploit people, to consolidate resources and wealth into a few hands, mm-hmm. to create immiseration with most people. We understand that that's not something we want to save. This is the criticism I have of, and I honestly... to be fair, I haven't tuned into him. To be fair. To be fair, I haven't watched anything he's done in a long time because I just can't do it. But this is my issue with people like Robert Reich. This is the definition of neoliberalism in a lot of ways, is trying to save capitalism. Especially if your analysis is that it doesn't work and it causes all these problems. Yeah. And then you say, well, if we just did it right.
Tweak it a little bit.
If we just
throw it out.
in a good way. Or if we had a good guy behind the death machine.
Yeah.
Then it would be a good death machine. Like, that analysis is so hollow. And honestly... bleeds propaganda, is full of propaganda that says like we can straddle the line in this analysis. We can say like, yeah, capitalism bad, but not really capitalism bad. And we can say like, it's always approaching these things with such like a mystified. You're so like confounded by all these things. Like, why is this all happening? It's crazy. In America in 2020, there are 500,000 homeless people. I wonder why.
How did we get here?
Housing is a commodity that is largely owned by a small group of people. And even if you can afford it, it's hard to maintain. And all these sorts of things. And they contribute to the mystification of these concepts. It's not mystifying. It's very simple. It's very simple. It's designed to create oligopolies, to create monopolies, to consolidate resources and wealth and power into a few hands. That's been the story since the Dutch or Italy or even before that.
Or the Parker brothers.
The what brothers?
The Parker brothers.
The Parker brothers. Because of monopoly?
Yeah, you said monopoly.
Yeah. Well, wasn't that game stolen from some Quaker woman?
I don't know, quite possibly.
I maybe that's some like cultural myth, but I remember something like that. But these are the things that I'm concerned with. Is this idea of that we just have to take it slow.
Yeah.
Like,
Incrementalism.
There's no speed limit to it, and you can't do things incrementally. You either save the dying person or you let them die.
Yeah.
I mean, or you actively kill them, but like letting them die and actively killing them are roughly, it's the same outcome. And I know I'm being overly simplistic here, but the point is, like, we can easily create the infrastructure to transcend some of these issues. And mystifying these concepts of saying, like, it's crazy how this keeps happening. We should make good laws that prevent this from happening. Like, that operates within the construct.
Yeah.
It doesn't create it doesn't change the superstructure at all. And meanwhile, like, it's absent of a power analysis, and complete. It's so close to being a thing I want to agree with. It's so close. But I mean, if it helps radicalize some libs, great. But that's my point, is I don't think it will. I think it's inherently reactionary, because I think what he's saying is we can save this system that is like a genocidal system that for the past 300 years or so, that has caused all the immiseration you've ever witnessed, for the most part, either indirectly or directly, as long as you or anyone you've ever known has been alive, certainly, and also is creating the conditions for your children and your grandchildren, maybe not to exist or to live in a non-habitable Earth, or whatever, to die from coronavirus, and all these sorts of things. So I want to, and maybe I haven't read enough of people like him, for example, but I do like, if you're looking for people with better analysis, I would recommend Michael Roberts. He is very in touch. There's a lot of people with a Marxist framework to work on. There's also Dean Baker, who understands things in a better way than some of these things. I don't agree with everything he says necessarily, but that's one of the few people in media that has a grounded idea, or grounded thoughts when it comes to things like China and patent law and things of that nature, and trade, because most people don't understand. They don't want to understand economics, because economics is very kind of not only mystified and confounding to them, but also like seems very abstract. And I think the more we can relate these things to the material conditions we're situated in, we live within, and how these are the deliberate, direct outcome of these systems, and that you can't legislate this away, and that you can't, like, even if on its most simple level, I mean, there's no reason why someone should have power over you in some of these ways. You know what I mean? Like we were talking about with health insurance. And the liberal response seems to be, I mean, forget the right-wing response, because like it's insane. But even the liberal response is like, you can't get rid of private insurance. Why? What's the net benefit? Risk pooling?
They don't
we have
benefit you in any way.
We have a collectivized answer for that, that literally all the world is doing, and has better outcomes, and cost less. But also in terms of they don't want to see ground on this, because the second you guarantee healthcare for people, whether it's through taxes, which I would kind of, that's not truly decommodifying something, but it's a start. It would be a very good start. Guaranteeing things for people, guaranteeing how. See, that's my point. Is people are going to start saying, "Oh, well, like I've been living in my car. I've been living in my parents' house even.
And crashing on my friend's couch.
Yeah, like why can't I have a house? Or even an apartment. Why can't I have my place to live so I can have some dignity? It's these same people that are like, move out of your parents' basement, kid.
Stop being lazy.
That support the economic programs that create the material conditions that kid will never be able to move out of his parents' basement.
They can't afford to.
And his parents might lose their house. That would be the time he's going to move out of his... Sorry, I almost...
Please don't hit me, sir.
So fired up. That's what I've been trying to avoid. I'm the steam whistle emoji. But that's the point. It's the same people. So I don't care about the words progressive anymore. I don't care about these things. We need to build this class analysis, and how you understand that is through material conditions. It's saying, are working class people immiserated deliberately? Okay. Are they immiserated indirectly or passively? Are you contributing to that through your ideology or through, your culture? Are you contributing to that economically through forms of domination, like private capital, like the financializing of the necessities of life? Do you support, are you building alternative systems of support? Are you showing solidarity? Are you in a union? Are you even kind of not so formally? Are you just organizing with people in your community? Which again is the most important thing you can do. Mm-hmm. This doesn't have to be centralized. In fact, the decentralized to some extent, the better. The point is, do you have that class analysis? Do you understand why we are where we are, and why it's not an accident, and why it's not, some unknowable thing?
Yeah.
And do you understand why Marxist economists have been able to predict like the last 5 recessions or whatever? And these sorts of things, and how adherence to the kind of culture of domination, exploitation propagated by private capital alienates you from everyone else, and destroys communities, and kind of creates a separate reality where you don't understand very basic things, and you will end up arguing for policies that will kill people on a large scale because you feel like they won't affect you. Mm-hmm. Do you have a power analysis? Do you understand how power works and how it flows through? Do you understand that your boss is capturing the value that you create? Do you understand that that happens to everyone? Do you understand how the value is then recaptured downstream by finance and by the market and by abstract commodity prices, by credit, that's what I mean by finance. And health insurance, honestly, and life insurance, and mortgages,
auto insurance.
Yeah. Think about home insurance just for a second. If your home burns down, what are they going to do? You build another one. You pay a premium based on the rebuild cost, essentially. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have your home if you're on your deathbed and you live for 90 years and for 60 of that you own this home, and you paid your premiums every single day, and it never burned down, and whatever, it was made of bricks, and nothing bad ever happened in there. Mm-hmm. What did you get? Peace of mind? You know what creates real peace of mind that isn't like neoliberal pseudo-violence? A housing guarantee.
Yeah. Guaranteed housing.
Yeah.
Guaranteed health care.
Decommodified housing. And we can talk about. I meant to talk more about the future and how we can build these systems, but that requires kind of going into the weeds a little bit on some of these things. And I want to try to do this in small doses, so not to overwhelm anyone. But okay, so you have any final thoughts on Bernie or any of the things we talked about tonight? Yes. Wait. Last thing, just to underscore this, because this is so important. Anyone who supports sanctions or economic warfare on any country is not someone who deserves your vote. And I know even Bernie has supported sanctions at some point. I'm sure he has, even if it's indirectly. And that's the point. The system corrupts everything, and you can't have heroes within it, and they fail you. So it's time to believe in each other. But sanctions are bad and kill people. Stop supporting them. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in regards to Bernie, I'm still, heartbroken and angry that he has dropped out. And people should really just, save their breath with you need to vote blue no matter who, because I'm telling you right now, I'm not doing it. So stop trying to convince me. We just need to focus on organizing as a community now.
Right. And I mean, I think the last election should teach a lesson to say that
it doesn't matter.
Not only is this probably going to go the same way, but also, why are you telling me? It was, 2 or 3 states that decided the outcome of that? Very little shifts within this system.
Yeah.
And that's kind of by design. Because we're not meant to have power, and that's the other thing. Eventually, we got to talk about American history and how this isn't I see a lot of people. Not to go off on a tangent, but I see a lot of people who are like, "This isn't what the founding fathers would want," or "That isn't what the founding fathers would want," or whatever. This is.
To what you were saying about war criminals.
They were a bunch of white slave owners.
If anything, they would be disappointed.
Apple pie.
They would be disappointed by even the lip service kind of social supports and that we're not if they could have seen 1930s Germany or World War II Germany at its peak, they would be coming in their knickers over that.
Long johns.
Yeah. They're whatever. What are old timey pants called? Knickerbockers?
Knickerbockers.
That's what they're called. Bloomers. Whatever.
Pantaloons.
George Washington's wooden teeth would have fallen out of his goddamn syphilis rotten head if he saw Hitler rise to power. And we're gonna have to confront that eventually. Whatever. People can make whatever weird qualifications or distinctions about that they want, but I mean.
Anyway.
Parker, final thoughts.
I'm joining the pickle party.
You're full of vinegar.
I'm done with this shit.
Well, tell us about the dudist pickle party.
No matter what the decision is, it'll always be pickles. And that reason will prevail, and pickle will prevail.
Pickles will prevail, yeah. The pickle abides. All right. Well, the last thing I want to say is, Bernie supporters, and I'm not saying that because I'm not one, but I'm saying this to speak to you directly. If you supported Bernie Sanders, if you still support Bernie Sanders or whatever, I feel you. I had this same feeling a month ago, right after Super Tuesday, because this is almost certainly what the outcome was going to be. And we knew he was going to fall in line. He already fell in line. I mean, you can't. It's hard to argue the sorts of things on a moral level that he was arguing when you look at someone like Joe Biden, who's basically responsible for every bad thing that's ever happened in the past 40 years, or not like like had a hand in it, and that's not a huge overstatement. It tracks fairly well. When you're talking about someone like that, and you're talking about the moral failings of the system, and someone who like is so representative of that system, and then you're like, my good friend, Joey B.
Yeah.
You know,
he's a decent guy.
Who's like archetypical.
The decent rapist war criminal.
Yeah. Like maybe let's stop trying. You know, that was very like vote blue, no matter who, whatever.
And I knew he was gonna do that, and that always pissed me off.
He's still a good guy or whatever. And you know what? Like, I genuinely don't care what anybody's feelings about him are on a personal level. I think it's I think it's crazy that we're here and that there isn't enough of an analysis of the situation right now to say that this is going to backfire either way. And so I had that moment, if you remember me talking to you very late at night about how this is exactly how this was going to end, and we all needed to be prepared. And that's the point. Is they were never going to let us have this one. So it's time to address that and stop playing the game. If you supported Bernie last time, and then you voted for Hillary because you had to, or you felt like you had to, what happened there? And also, I would say, even if Hillary Clinton was elected, the world wouldn't be
a better place.
All that different. And you can be mad at me for that, but Haiti.
Enough said.
I'm not going to talk about Hillary Clinton because she's not worth talking about. But that's the point, is this system doesn't work for you. So we tried as hard as we could, like gods. Did working class people try? And that was one of my questions that I asked, if you remember, talking to the Bernie campaign when we were working with them.
I do.
And saying, what is your plan
when the DNC screws him
when
again?
This daydream that we live in a rational world and that if you just do the right thing, it'll work out. What is your plan then? And they didn't have one.
They were just like, let's just keep knocking on doors.
They didn't have one. And that was disappointing. Because what we need are fighters. So, build mutual aid, build community organizing, organize your workplace. And when this whole lockdown situation is over, and through it, like, we need to counter any attempts at this like encroachment of a hyper strong police state, because it's coming, and it will be the new normal in all of these cases. Once these kind of fascistic once this fascist architecture is put in place, it's never removed. It becomes a new normal, and we get used to it, and that's what's dangerous. So, the time has come to believe in ourselves and stop funneling things, stop being supplicants, stop begging for things, and start making demands. And it's going to be hard. And that's why I'm not going to be mean to any of these people who are truly, if you're we're all flawed, okay? And so now's the time. I don't care who you supported when. And vote for Joe Biden. I don't care. But we need to build these alternative systems, because regardless of who you vote for, nothing is going to change. And I don't like saying that. You know I don't like saying these things because I don't like people to feel hopeless. But the point is, if we don't change things, they ain't going to change. Nobody's coming to save you, and I've said that for a while. Bernie wasn't going to save us. It wasn't even his plan. the best thing he could have done was stayed out of the way and not called upon state violence or further state violence while we liberated ourselves. And that was always the plan. And if you're under some other illusion, then you got some catching up to do. Mm-hmm. This is going to be the hard work. It's not going to be easy. It wasn't meant to. So now's the time to do the hard work. And if you're sitting at home right now, you have some time. And that's not pressure. That's just a fact. So, build your community. Build solidarity, build strength. And stop making excuses for the state and for private capital. Stop authorizing it to use its limitless power to crush other people. And that's why I will not vote for Joe Biden. I will not authorize him to do any of the numerous acts of violence through austerity that I know he is just wet in the mouth to do. And if you don't think Joe Biden will kill a lot of people through austerity, you don't know his record and you don't understand some very basic things about this country and the world and the moment we're in. So get radical, and we are going to continue to address these things. We ran long again, but it's good. I think this was another good one. So stay safe out there, stay healthy. I hope everyone's weathering this as well as they can, but this is a long way from over, so try to stay sane and support each other.